This is the story of Azza Airways Flight 2241. On the 21st of October 2009, an Azza Airways Boeing 707 was on the ground at Sharjah International Airport. This 707 was owned by Azza Airways, but it was operated by Sudan Airways, and today it was to fly to Khartoum International Airport in Sudan. This was a cargo plane, and today it would be flying everything from air conditioning units, car parts, computers, and tools. At 11:08 a.m. UTC, the plane pushed back from the cargo area bound for runway 30 with a crew of 6. As the plane taxied, the controller gave the crew everything that they needed for the takeoff: squawk codes, altitudes, frequencies, all of it. Flight 2241 was asked to line up and wait on runway 30. There was a slight 10-knot wind blowing in from 320 degrees as they lined up on runway 30. With that, the plane started down runway 30 and it lifted off. Shortly after liftoff, the crew lost engine number 4. They informed the controller that they had lost engine number 4. The controller pushed the crash alarm and let the crew know that both runways were available for an emergency landing. But no reply came from the crew. The controller watched on as the plane entered a right bank. At first, it was a small bank, but the controller watched on as the bank grew and grew. The large 707 started to lose altitude. The plane was soon in a 90-degree right bank as the controller looked on in horror. After almost a minute of flight, the 707 impacted the ground. It hit the ground 0.8 nautical miles from the airport. None of the 6 people on board made it. No one on the ground was injured either. But the investigation started not at the crash site, but on runway 30, the runway from which the plane had departed. They found the cowlings of engine number 4 battered and bent on the runway. The cowling is the outside covering of the engine, a shell, if you will. From the looks of it, the cowling came off as the plane took off. They decided to investigate further. They looked at the history of the cowlings in question. But first, let's talk about the cowlings themselves. The cowlings cover the engine, and so they are cylindrical. The cowling is made up of 2 halves. The bottom part is held together with 6 latches. At the top, it's fixed to the wing pylon with hinges. Delving into the maintenance history, they found that the number 4 engine cowlings had been written up during a maintenance check in 2009. They found that the engine cowlings were hard to open and to close, and upon further inspection, they found that the cowlings were bent. But as per documents, repairs had been carried out. Another check a few months later called for the inspection of the cowlings, the hooks, the fasteners, the hinges, all of the supporting items of the cowlings, all of it. The document showed that these inspections and the repairs had taken place, but the repairs on the cowlings looked old. They looked so old that they probably predated both maintenance checks. That's not all. They found bent alignment pins and double holes in the latches that held both of the cowling halves together. This is indicative of force being applied to mate the 2 halves together. They should ideally just latch in place. They found more proof that the 2 cowling halves were not lined up properly when it was secured in place. They found that a guide pin in one of the latches never went into the hole that it needed to go into. Instead, the protruding pin created another hole right next to the hole that it was supposed to go into. Other parts found on the runway also showed poor quality repairs. The welding wasn't done properly. Wrong materials were used for repairs. A hinge found on the runway had fatigue markings. The hinge didn't cause the cowlings to come apart, but they illustrated the lack of oversight and maintenance that the plane had been through. So, on that day, as the plane took off, the force exerted by the air on the improperly sealed cowlings forced the left-hand cowling apart from its right-hand counterpart. The unfastened cowling experienced a lot of drag, and this caused more latches and hinges to fail. After a point, it was like a sail catching the wind. This caused the right-hand cowling to bend and buckle. Then the right-hand cowling failed. Since the right and left halves were still attached by a few latches, the right-hand cowling took the left-hand cowling with it. Now, losing your cowlings isn't catastrophic. Even without the cowlings, the plane is more than flyable. But in this case, as the cowls fell away, they struck a line in the engine, severing it. The line or pipe that the cowls severed was the PT7 flex line. The EPR, or engine pressure ratio, is the pressure of air at the front of the engine to the pressure of the air coming out of the engine. Inlet and outlet pressures are sent to a box via lines or pipes. Inside this box, the two pressures create an electric signal, which is then interpreted as an EPR reading by a gauge. When the line got severed, the line that was supposed to send the outlet pressure, or the pressure of the exhaust, was sending the ambient pressure. This caused the EPR for engine number 4 to drop to about 1.05. This explained why the crew thought that they had lost engine number 4, because that's what their instrument was telling them. From here on out, things get a bit hazy, as neither the cockpit voice recorder nor the flight data recorder survived. So, the investigators had to go off of simulation data to piece together what happened next. From the wreckage, they noted that the number 4 engine was spinning at a high rate of speed at impact. They also noted that the thrust reverser was not in a deployed state at impact. Had the failed cowlings forced the thrust reverser out, it would have made controlling the plane very difficult, but that wasn't the case this time. They also modeled the drag caused by the engine. It was negligible. The plane should have had more than enough power to climb out. The investigators believed that the right bank that the plane went into was intentional. It was probably the pilots trying to bring the plane back in for an emergency landing. When you're banking, you need more lift to keep your plane in the air. Also, the pilot needs to pitch up to counter the drag being experienced by the plane. All of this meant that the pilot needed to add more power while the turn was being made, but apparently that's not what the pilot did. Quote, "At the beginning of the aircraft departure from the climb path and when the right turn and bank were initiated, it appears that the engine thrust was not added simultaneously to compensate for the increased drag. The result was that the aircraft started to lose altitude during its turn towards the airport." End quote. As the plane started dropping, an eyewitness, who was a pilot themselves, heard the engine spool up. It appears that the pilots applied the power that they so desperately needed too late. This is backed up by the cockpit instruments recovered from the plane. The number 3 engine showed an EPR of about 2.17. The eyewitness also saw the plane pitch up right before it hit the ground. Had this been done earlier, it probably would have saved the plane, but pitching up now in this low speed state sent them into a stall. Crews are usually caught off guard by upsets, and this case is no different. In addition to that, they were misled by the engine number 4's EPR reading. This is the perfect situation for a crew to lose their situational awareness. Their fixation on the number 4 engine probably contributed to this. In addition to that, they were in a regime of flight where there was very little margin for error. Their training may have also been lacking, as their simulator and flight training did not give them enough experience on recovering from a 45-degree sharp bank. Maintenance was also seen as something that could have been improved. The maintenance deficiencies with the cowlings were never properly reported, and corrective action was not taken. In fact, deeper inspections should have been done. When they looked at the operator itself, they found even more troubling things. After an audit, the investigator said, and I quote, "No quality organization was seen," end quote. The operator did not have a lot of documents about the flight crew, like training records, which meant that they could not evaluate the performance of their pilots. It was so bad that the operator could not have operated this plane in a safe manner. Making matters worse, the oversight of the Sudan Civil Aviation Authority, or the SCAA, was lacking as well. Their audits never found these maintenance issues. Just to drive home the point about the state of this plane, let's take the example of the flight data recorder. Yeah, the recorder failed, but not because of impact forces, but because it was very old. As per ICAO standards, this recorder should have been replaced on the 1st of January, 1995. This recorder was so old that it used a roll of metal to record data, and it recorded like 5 parameters. This is why maintenance is so important. Things can go wrong in the wildest of ways. If you neglect to maintain your plane, just know it's not a question of if, but a question of when. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I'll catch you guys next time. Stay safe.